politicians, just need to ensure that they and the institutions that they run are open to the public and transparent, and the people at the top feel accountability for what goes on right through the institution and are held to account for it.
A recent survey by the Office of National Statistics found that public trust in political parties has collapsed to just 12% in the UK. Approximately 68% of people said they distrusted political parties. Tony Travers is an expert in local and national government and a visiting professor in the Department of Government at LSE. Tony, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Let's dig straight in. How would you define the current state of public trust in our politicians?
Well, I think you summed it very elegantly with the Office for National Statistics' view on this. They undertake polling, examine public opinion relatively recently, and the results were very much as you described them. We also know from polling done by polling companies that trust in politicians and political parties is low and way lower than in many other professions. So there's undoubtedly been a reduction in trust. Now, let's not get too starry-eyed here. There's no doubt that politicians have not been trusted. The other way around. There's always been reasons why the public has been suspicious of politicians, particularly those not on their own side. And you can look back into history. There were cartoonists drawing most unflattering cartoons about politicians in the 18th century, early 19th century. So there's a sort of long-term issue here. Then there's the shorter-term one, which is it appears that trust in politicians has been reduced. It has fallen away.
So it's not a new thing, but would you say this is an all-time low, certain in recent times?
Well, certainly the figures that have recently been produced by some polling companies suggest that it's lower than at any time since they started measuring trust in people, in professions, including in politicians. So it does appear to be very low. There is international polling that suggests trust in democracy in Britain has fallen, and perhaps even fallen more than in other countries besides. So there's definitely something going on here. And what Keir Starmer's talking about, obviously, is trust within the existing political system. But of course, he and the Conservatives are in the same political system when it comes to the kind of discussion we're having about broader trust in politics and the political system.
Yeah, I'll come back in a second to Keir Starmer's speech and his sort of appeal to us to trust him. But what if we are saying that trust in politicians in general across the parties is at an all-time low? What can we attribute this fall in trust to?
Well, I think every now and again something comes along that makes it very obvious, like the MP's expenses scandal back in 2009. That, I think, had a profound impact on trust. I think more recently, the chaotic handling of government at the end of the pandemic and revelations about what went on in Downing Street. I think Liz Truss's period as Prime Minister, none of that will have helped. And, even though the last two things I'm talking about were a Conservative government delivering those sort of outcomes, the truth is, I think most members of the public look at MPs in all parties and judge them across the board. So I think that the MP's expenses scandal definitely a significant issue. One other thing I'd say is that politicians now, as they follow polling to try to offer the public things that they think the public will like, risk over-promising and under-delivering all the time, offering more public spending with lower taxes. And, that's mathematically not possible beyond a point.
Does it matter, Tony, if we do or don't trust our politicians?
Oh, it does, absolutely. I mean, the general election might end, I'm not saying it will, but it might end with all the most powerful people in the country, certainly politically powerful people in the country, voluntarily handing power to people they've actively campaigned against and don't like very much, or at least politically don't like very much. And they'll do that voluntarily because we, the people, empower it through voting. So all of democracy rests upon us agreeing to, assenting to, be governed like this. We don't have a written or fully codified constitution in the UK, so we don't have some basic document to point to. So in a sense, the sum total of what we all believe about democracy, about voting, about trust in politicians is what empowers the governments in power now. And if there were to be a change of government, a new government, and indeed the change if there were to be one.
So, speaking of that potential change in government, do you think Keir Starmer's speech, in which he very directly was appealing to us to trust him, was it convincing enough for people who don't trust Labour on certain things, including the economy and security?
Well, in some ways, he's fighting, given the conversation we're just having, he's got two problems. He's got the broader problem that all politicians, Conservative, Labour, Liberal Democrat, SNP, Plaid Cymru, they've all got this, because they're all politicians, they've all got political parties, parties trusted even less than the government and MPs. So against that backdrop, Keir Starmer's got two problems. He's got that one, all politicians face it, you could say that's equal for all. But then there's the fact that his party was led by Jeremy Corbyn, in a way that proved, particularly in the last election, to be most unpopular, unelectable. 32% of the vote, Conservatives easily won it with a big majority. And so he's trying to convince people that his leadership has changed the Labour Party into to being a more mainstream, middle of the road party, and that he can be trusted with our money for a start.
In a broader sense, Tony, how does this sit in terms of trust in our public institutions as well? I mean, political parties, as we just said, are the least trusted of any UK public institution. But just in the past week, we've seen Paula Vennells at the Post Office inquiry. We've seen the findings of the inquiry into the infected blood scandal. Both of these are asking serious questions about trust in two formerly hugely respected British institutions, the Post Office and the NHS. What does that tell us, and what does it mean for our faith in those institutions as well?
This is a great question. You might add also the water industry, which, although it was privatised, is publicly regulated. So I think if you add all of these together, there is clearly a very significant problem, and the problem boils down to senior people in public institutions not being able to be held to account properly. We'll find out whether there are criminal prosecutions in the matter of the Post Office, and possibly with the infected blood scandal as well. So I think the difficulty with these issues, and going on to the water companies, is that the people at the top appear to behave as if they are not genuinely accountable for what goes on in those institutions. And does that erode trust in their kind of institutions? Well, of course it will. I mean, there are still professions who are very highly trusted. People trust, perhaps not surprisingly, nurses, doctors, airline pilots. So people with a particular scientific expertise they trust. But with the infected blood scandal, that is an NHS scandal, and people in it as well. So it'll be interesting to see what effect that has on trust in the National Health Service and indeed in doctors.
And Tony, what do you think we can do to help rebuild trust in these institutions? I mean, it's not a great state of affairs to have such little trust in huge institutions which we rely on.
Again, absolutely, we rely on them all, and we do have trust in a fair number of institutions where we experience what they're doing and realise, on balance, they're doing reasonably well for us. Supermarkets tend to be real private sector companies, by the way, which live and die by the way they sell things. Are they any good? And if they're not, the stock market or their owners soon discover that. So I think for institutions that have lost trust, they just have to think about what are the ingredients or the bad ingredients that have led to this situation. I mentioned one already. I think over-promising and under-delivering is endemic in politics. So if you tell people you can do things you can't do, and the government's had this problem really with the Rwanda policy, it eventually becomes even more problematic than the problem that they're trying to solve in the first place. I think beyond that, politicians just need to ensure that they and the institutions that they run are open to the public and transparent, and the people at the top feel accountability for what goes on right through the institution and are held to account for it.
Tony, thank you so much for your insights this afternoon. It's great to speak to you. That's Tony
Thank
Travers, Professor in the Department of Government at the London School of Economics. And just on the WhatsApp this afternoon, Lisa has texted in to say, I don't understand why anybody would trust any politician to deliver on their promises. Thank you for that, Lisa. Please do keep texting in with your thoughts about that and everything else.